All right, welcome to a special episode of the Stages podcast. Even a special co-host, not the usual JB Hager. This time, for you fans of Stages from last summer, you would have recognized this man. Dylan Casey is sitting in with me. What you don't know is last summer, Dylan was just an old teammate and an old friend. But I've somehow managed to strong-arm him into joining forces over here at We Do and launching this brand.
That's right.
Which is, so Dylan Casey is now the first and only CEO of We Do. And in and under that, obviously, you have the Forward podcast, you have Stages, which is what we're doing today. As we said on Facebook Live and Instagram Live, this is different, right, than talking about a bike race.
We're not talking about a race. We're not talking about, the dynamics of what went down in today's stage or what might happen in tomorrow's stage. This is basically something entirely new for Stages and We Do, and I think it also kind of sets the stage for where we're going in 2018.
Right. And so it started last, when JB and I were cranking out the daily show during the tour, as soon as it ended, the question started, well, what's next?
Right.
And what about the Vuelta? What about the Worlds? What about Ironman? Well, we've done some of that. We did Ironman. We did the holiday gift guide. But I think the unique thing that we can do, and actually any of us can do this, which is the amazing thing in this day and age, is we can broadcast a show at the spur of the moment. And so here we are. But going into 2018, we initially set out to do 50 shows.
That's right, 50 episodes.
50 episodes. So whether that's covering the Spring Classics or whether or not that's covering our adventures at the 24 Hours in the Old Pueblo, or obviously the tour, who knows what happens and who knows what pops up. So for you fans of Stages, just
get
sit
ready.
Down and grab your popcorn and get ready for 2018 because the content will be wildly expanded.
That's right.
Yeah. Dylan actually called me and said, should we make a Stages episode about the Chris Froome situation?
Yeah.
And I said, you're out of your fucking mind.
Crazy.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I'm going to hang up. Because in my own insecure way, I was like, I'm the last person that should be opining on this situation.
Right.
But as we began to talk about it, and I think this is where you came from, or your perspective that you came from, was that something, obviously we need to understand the science, which Doc Phelan will help us understand. We need to understand all the other data that's out there, but something's not right about the way this unfolded, the way it was leaked, that just the chain of events doesn't feel legitimate.
Well, I think,
and I'm not trying to pass judgment, good or bad.
Right. I mean, we've seen this movie over and over and over, right? And there's been all of this effort to, improve the way that the sport is governed, improve the way that the sport and the business of professional cycling is run. And there's definitely been a lot of progress, but I think the bigger question is why is this movie continuing to play out over and over and over? Because, the people that are involved in the sport or are part of it from a participant perspective or a business perspective, the numbers are not up and to the right, right? And I don't think it's up and to the right for the fans. I don't think it's up and to the right for the media. I think
all the stakeholders,
right? And so this isn't rocket surgery, right? It's everybody knows what the problem is, and I'm alluding to probably what we're going to talk about,
right?
But the bigger issue is that why can't we actually make progress?
Yep.
Because I don't think we have. So for those people who literally just crawled out from under a rock, sure,
right? Let's assume there was one person listening they're like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Right.
So if you haven't been paying attention, Chris Froome, who won the Tour de France, he's now won it 4 times. He just won the Tour of Spain. This particular episode took place at the Tour of Spain, which, by the way, I'm just going to say it right now. Christ. I said during Stages last summer during the tour, JB, back me up. JB's in the room, and you all listen, you people listening, I said it. I said, why in the fuck would you go do the Tour of Spain? You just won the tour for the 4th time. You've got this beautiful wife and a beautiful baby. Go chill on the beach. Unless they are backing up the Brinks truck, which maybe they did.
They did.
They don't have that race doesn't have any money. But if they don't, why? Anyways, Sorry.
I don't know why you got to hate on the Vuelta, man. That's a beautiful race.
Listen, here's the dirty secret to the listeners, right? This man's sitting across the table from me. He never did the Tour de France. He never did the Tour of Italy.
Yeah.
Guess what's the only Grand Tour he's ever done?
Yeah, Tour of Spain. La Vuelta.
Look at him. He's got their back.
I do. I love this. I love the Spanish. I love them.
Anyway, so last week,
Yeah.
I actually wake up and I get a text from my buddy College, who
of course.
says, I wonder if this will, he said something, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So I open the link. Well, turns out Chris Froome comes back. This urine test comes back with
Adverse.
twice the allowable amount of salbutamol in his urine.
Right.
Which, and they call it an adverse analytical or something.
Adverse analytical finding.
Right. Which I don't know what that means, but you're allowed for asthmatics. You're allowed to have 1,000 micrograms per whatever.
Right.
And he turned in 2,000.
Right.
And so, it is not a banned substance. It is
Well,
not. It is.
well, hold on. So, according to the rule book, my interpretation, because I went and did a little bit of research, it's a banned substance with a caveat, right? Which is you're allowed to have so much of it in your urine, under the following
there's
conditions.
a threshold.
There's a threshold, right? So I think there's some semantics there that are probably important, but for all intents and purposes, this is something that you're allowed to use during competition as long as you don't cross this threshold.
Right. Right. So maybe now's a good time to get, because I'm still super confused about salbutamol. But
Right.
before we pull in the doc, I just want to say my fiance Anna, who I talk about all the time on the other show, is an asthmatic. So she has salbutamol or Ventolin at the house, and so this goes down, and I'm going out for a ride. I was like, yo. And I was like digging around in the drawers. I was like, I called her. I was like, honey, where's your inhaler? I want to try something. I'm doing this show.
Yeah.
I
it's all
need
for
to
research.
I need to do some research. I'm like, how much do I do? She's like, try 3 puffs. So I take 3 puffs. I go for my bike ride. Granted, I wasn't trying to go up, a big mountain or try to win a stage in any bike race, but I was just cruising around. And for the record, I didn't feel anything other than maybe a little fidgety, to be honest. But Doc, are you on the line here, Doc Phelan?
Yeah, I'm here.
So can you just bring these two idiots and all the other listeners up to speed on talk to us about asthmatics and talk to us about salbutamol inhalers. Just give me a little, WebMD quickie on what substance we're talking about.
So the substance we're talking about is a medication that we use. It's called a short-acting beta agonist, means really quick onset, and it gets out of your system real quickly. I think it's important to point out that the 3 substances that are allowed per WADA are just inhaled substances. Oral medications or IV medications of this same substance are prohibited. They're not allowed. But by getting these 3 substances in, asthmatics or racers who have asthma can legally get a certain amount of medication and stay under these thresholds. So these inhalers we use to relax the smooth muscles that line the respiratory tree. So it really opens up the airways when someone is having an asthma attack, or Froome technically has some degree of asthma and also exercise-induced asthma. So actually exercising causes the airways to constrict a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when I was racing, I was actually diagnosed by the doctor, our team doctor as well, to have exercise-induced asthma, and I used salbutamol, and my symptoms were exacerbated by either altitude or really, really intense efforts like time trials, and my response was, my throat, I would feel like I had bronchitis, and I was like, I'd be coughing up phlegm the whole time. So if I used the inhaler, it would basically decrease the response that I was getting from exercising, essentially. So that's how I used it.
And we do know that it is true that on the WADA list that the inhaler is legal up to the threshold. Oral isn't, and injectable is not. Doc, I read, I flipped it to you on email earlier, but I read an article on cycling tips with a doctor from the Irish Federation that said that even though his limit was 2,000, twice the allowable limit, according to this particular doctor, an oral ingestion of this salbutamol would be, 20,000. Like it would be. Is that true, or is that a possibility?
Well, it depends on the dose of the pill that you're taking. It's legally available in like a 4 milligram dose. Can't really equate the amount that's in an inhaler with the pill, but the reason these drugs are on the banned list is, if you go back to the drug clenbuterol, clenbuterol is a cousin of the substance we're talking about. It's anabolic. So it helps build muscle. It repartitions fat. It repartitions how you use energy. There were weightlifters in the late 90s and early 2000s who got big sanctions for having positive tests for clenbuterol.
And this is true, and I've asked enough questions about this, and I always go to this place of like, just because of my own personal history, and I won't bore you with all that, but like, where's the study that says that salbutamol, whatever how you say, is a performance enhancing drug, right? And so there is none, right? That's a fact. There are no studies that say that this is a performance enhancing. However, there is one study.
You mean inhaled fashion?
Yes. However, correct. I'm sorry, inhaled. But let's work off the assumption that this was too many. This is Puffgate, right? We didn't tell the listener that we've now dubbed it Puffgate. But let's work off the assumption that Chris had too many puffs. There is one study out of a Danish lab that says when you combine the three, I guess there's 3 different types of inhalers for asthmatics that are approved up to the threshold. If their study, according to this study, if you used all 3, they tested it with 100-meter swimmers.
Right.
And they were shaving, and again, I don't know how all this necessarily works, but they were shaving 1 second. And actually, Doc Phelan's one of the best master swimmers in the country, so he'll appreciate this. He probably already read the study. But in the 100-meter swimmers, they shaved a second off their time. So let's say that 100 meters for those high-level swimmers is 50 seconds.
That's
1 second is not nothing.
That's a lot.
That's big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a solid improvement.
But we don't know, right? We don't know, and we're not going to say that those other 2 inhalers or asthma medicines were involved.
Right. Well, actually, and that's not even the point of this conversation that you and I are having.
Right.
Right. That's not what brought us here. In fact, I think once we get everybody on the same page with regards to kind of the assumptions that we're basing our conversation on, then this is where we get to turn left. Everybody else is going down the road to the right, and, it's been published and printed and podcasted and tweeted and Instagrammed to death by now. Well, we're going left because I basically have a totally different perspective and interest on this.
Yep.
And that's the question which is, okay, why are we talking about this? Right?
Well,
I mean, but seriously,
people are going to think you're crazy for saying that. Of course we're talking about it.
But the thing is that the question that we should be really asking is, why did this get leaked to the press? Who benefits from whatever's going on here? Because 100% there's something politically, there's some sort of political agenda that's getting played out, and Chris Froome and Sky,
and for the entire sport,
and for that matter, all the other teams and all the other riders, all the mechanics, the soigneurs, the cooks, the secretary that works in the office to send people paperwork, they're all getting thrown under the bus by this political agenda.
Well, you got to keep in mind, man. I mean, think about this, and again, this is maybe a little inside baseball, but the timing of this, right? This happens on the 18th stage of the Tour of Spain, so in September sometime. The International Federation, the president is Brian Cookson, who's a Brit.
For the UCI.
who for the our international governing body.
Right.
About a month after that, at the World Championships, is when they have the election every 4 years or whatever. Cookson loses the election to a French guy, David Leparchien. So he comes in. So this entire controversy has spanned 2 different administrations, right?
Right.
And so to me, when you have a shift or a change in administration, people come in and people go out.
Right.
And so while it happened under Cookson's, under his watch or on his watch, there were other people that knew.
Right.
So if you're stressing the leak, I mean, there are plenty of people that could have leaked this.
Well, let's back up for a second. So as I understand the rules and the process and protocol that's supposed to be followed in this particular type of case, the UCI and the organization responsible for essentially following that process has not done anything incorrect. And Chris and his team have not done anything incorrect as it's written in the rule book.
Right. I guess.
The reason that you and I are here talking about this and the rest of, the world and people that care about this sport are talking about it is because it was leaked to the press.
Right.
Okay? So that's really where the question, that's the spark for this question, which is really around why are we doing this again? It's the same movie over and over.
Because cycling is the sporting world's doormat.
Right. It's a whipping boy.
And by the way, I'm going to say this, I have to take a lot of blame for that.
Mm-hmm.
This is so easy for the press to say, well, I mean,
it's a find and replace. They've
got
the article.
The article the day after in the New York Times was the biggest bunch of bullshit that I have ever read.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of baseball that gets the New York Times every day and you read that story, and it is just so harsh on Chris Froome and on the sport and on our sports history. Yes, I'm sure we deserve a lot of that, and I'm trying to accept some responsibility here because I've sort of tainted the entire equation, obviously. But you don't get an accurate depiction of this situation by reading that article.
Right.
And that's the thing that really, I read that and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, you'd have read that article and thought Chris Froome had, a gallon of EPO for breakfast.
Right.
And that's not accurate and is not fair to him. And by the way, too, while I'm at it, like, he could be completely exonerated.
Right.
He is tarnished forever.
Well, damage is done.
Damage is done, and that you might think that I'm talking about him caring whether or not they write negative articles about him. He may or may not. I don't know, and that don't really matter. But come next July, assume all this gets cleared up.
Sure.
Come next July, riding around France, it is already unpleasant for him. This is going to be complete mayhem, and I know exactly what that fucking feels like, and it ain't any fun.
Right, and at the top of every climb and at the finish of every stage, especially if he wins one, what's the first question that he's going to have in the press conference room?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what that'll be the same thing that gets printed in every publication.
Here, you know what? You want to talk about a messed up system. Now that you want to talk about the process and the system, this could go on until late spring. I mean, this is not.
It could go on for a year.
This could go on for a long time, and this is what happens in the sport of cycling. Is It just hangs over, and the structure of the sport is so fundamentally weak because you have this structure that was built 100 years ago,
right? That
really not a lot has changed, if anything, and you might even argue that it's gotten worse,
right?
But all the while, you see the global impressions, you see the impact that the sport has in the world psyche, and it doesn't match up.
Mm-mm. Well, and I think the real question is, like, again, why it just doesn't make any sense why this sport keeps doing the same thing over and over.
Well, and I'll tease out a future episode. We talked at the top of the show that that this channel is going to have more and more content Rafa, the super cool apparel line and cycling line out there, they have these questions, right? This is like a fundamental question for their business,
Sure.
which it should be.
Sure.
And so they commissioned basically a case study on how to fix cycling, basically.
Yeah.
Called the Rafa Roadmap, 25,000 word
Wow.
document. And once that's released in the new year, Oliver Dugan, from their head of content at Rafa, is going to come here to the /Stages studio to break it down.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated. They went and talked to all of the stakeholders, all of the people over the last 50 years of this sport to try to figure out how do we fix it.
Sure. You know, it's funny. I used to always wonder, like, there's all these competing entities or stakeholders in the sport of cycling. You have the UCI, which is the governing body, which really has a role in, you know, managing and enforcing all of the rules. You know, and things like the start line is here, the finish line is here, and you know, there's all this stipulation that goes on with putting on an actual event.
Right.
And then
giving event sanctioning.
Yes, you sanction the events. You actually, and then you issue the licenses to the teams, and they're responsible for kind of making sure that the teams meet certain guidelines to be professional organizations. You have the national governing bodies, which you know, are essentially components of their national Olympic committees, and then you have the actual event owners, right? Amory Sports Organization being the most prominent with the ownership of the Tour de France, and then a handful of other.
And your favorite race, the Tour of Spain.
That's right, Tour of Spain. And then you have the teams who essentially operate as individual businesses, right? And
then you have the fans.
And then you have the fans. The question I always wondered is, like, why is it necessary? And of course, actually, one other topic, worst thing that ever happened to pro cycling or cycling in general was having professionals in the Olympics.
I agree.
So just
don't get me started.
Hold that thought for a second, because
Okay.
I think we'll go back to that. Okay. But I always wondered, okay, well, why does the ASO need the UCI? You know, or any of these other organizations? And so this is what I have a question. So I heard this rumor, I heard this, and I don't know if it's true, but the reason that if you're an organizer and you want to put on a pro race, that you need the UCI is that you have to get a license to close the roads from the national cycling body, and that it's a European law.
Right.
In order to close the road in Belgium, you have to go to the Belgian Cycling Federation and get permission and get a permit from them.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have to use the UCI to basically
Well,
govern the race.
that
So,
makes this sport very different than any other sport in the world.
so I'm just curious. So if somebody can find out if that's true or not, I'd love to actually know.
Okay.
So they can email to.
Just send it to the Forward podcast.
No,
where?
we have one for Stages.
Oh, we do?
Yeah,
Great.
it's Stages.
See, the CEO knows these things. I don't even know.
We have an email for Stages. It's stages@wedo.team.
Yeah.
Cool. Send us an email and let us know if that's true, because that would be really interesting to understand the dynamics that are influencing this sport from a political perspective.
And we had this conversation at dinner last night. Like, cycling thing, as big and as massive as it is globally, this is a very different, what you just said.
Yeah.
May or may not be true. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But cycling differentiates itself from other sports because we don't have a stadium. We don't have an arena. We don't have a practice facility.
Right.
The road is our
the stadium.
stadium.
Yeah.
And by the way, too, it is what it is. That will never change, and that should never change. It is amazing that the fans can stand on the side of Alpe d'Huez and be close to the Chris Froomes and the Bardets of the world, whoever, the Quintanas, and literally touch them.
Right.
But that also means that at the end of the day, they go back down to the Campanile, and there's no wall around the Campanile or the Mercure or the Hotel de Ville. Like, you are literally just like, what's up, people?
Yeah.
Like, there is no barrier there that we're getting removed from the Froome situation. But I think it goes back to answering the question, like, why is this sport such a banana republic?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Because it's and there are parts, like I just said, that people can take this sport in personally, but it's just very, very different. There is no separation from the athlete to the fan.
Right.
And so with that comes access. And by the way, the media wants access. And by the way, all the stakeholders want that special access. So that can I just bring up one other thing that I don't get? Because we just talked about all these stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
You've got the International Federation, you've got the anti-doping agencies, the fans, the organizers, the press, the teams, the sponsors, the industry. But then you layer in, like, there's an organization called MPCC, which is this Mouvement pour Cyclisme.
Right.
I don't even know what it means. And they came out today and said, based on the facts that they see, Chris Froome should be suspended. So I'm like, why do we need who just created another police force?
Well, they basically said to Sky, you should suspend your rider.
Right. Well, that would
right. You should suspend your employee. But this has always been my point of view. The athletes and the teams depend on a clear set of guidelines and rules to operate within. And there's nothing in the UCI rulebook that says, in this current scenario, that the team is required to suspend Chris. So why should they do something that they're not required to do? I mean, right? Like, at the end of the day, these teams are in the business of competing to win races so that they can return on the investment that the sponsors make in that individual team.
Yep.
Now, maybe there's where the problem is. Maybe the incentives for the teams are not in line with the incentives of the governing body or the anti-doping agency.
Yep.
Right? And so you have three agencies or three entities that all have different constituents. And, here we are with the same movie playing over and over.
Yep. So let's go. I'm going to go back to Doc because I have a question. Doc, are you still there?
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
Not that you're Chris Froome or his team doctor, but if just imagining that you are, say he is a severe asthmatic person, athlete, if they just said, okay, no more asthma medicines, no more salbutamol, no more inhalers, could he compete? I mean, I'm sorry. Could he be competitive? I should say. Of course, he can compete, but could he and would
compete.
he be?
Yeah. That's a tougher question to answer. I mean, obviously, he's racing at a very high, very elite level with severe asthma. So if you didn't treat this at all with, really, salbutamol is what we call a rescue inhaler. So it's for when things kind of, when the shit hits the fan, when things get bad, that's when you use that. Some people use it throughout the day, but it's very short. So there's other medicines that could be used that are legal. You start to get into some of the inhaled corticosteroids, which corticosteroids in and of themselves have an issue. But I think Froome has said that he takes a medication called fluticasone, which is a longer acting steroid to help manage some of the asthma. So if you took away salbutamol, you said, hey, you can't have this to race anymore. My impression is that he could race, but I don't personally think that he would be on a podium, and not just him, any asthmatic where you've taken away part of their medication.
And Doc, have you paid any attention or read anything at all about, I mean, obviously we are where we are, like what's next?
Right.
We talked that it might take forever, but like there is a next, like assuming, I think we all assume that the B sample has confirmed the A sample. And so there's this talk about him going in and trying to recreate those conditions and trying to prove that spike, right, from more than 1,000 all the way to 2,000 was normal and natural. And so have you read it all about that? And is that, I mean, it just seems to me like you're like 18 days into a grand tour. That I don't know how you go into a lab and try to recreate that.
I think that would be very difficult. I mean, how long has this guy been a professional rider? 10 years?
Yeah.
I mean, he's had asthma reportedly for his whole life. So I think he, as the patient, would have a good understanding of how these medications work for him. He also, I believe, probably knows the rules, and they have a good understanding. This is not a hard and fast rule, but let's say, Lance, you did 3 puffs of Anna's inhaler before you went out on your ride, right? Each of those puffs is roughly going to turn into about 100 if we test your urine. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I would have tested you 30 minutes later after your 3 puffs, I probably would have gotten a 300 in your urine. 2.5 hours later, your level would have been 150. So each of these drugs has a half-life. Salbutamol is about 2.5 hours. So that even though you're using it throughout the day, you're also losing some that you're able to measure throughout the day as well. So it gets to, you know, knowing how to handle your disease. You've also got team doctors. I have a hard time believing that a team doctor is going to say, hey, double your dose during this race. You even experienced some of you said you felt jittery, right? These drugs make your heart rate go faster. So, you know, at a level of 2,000 that Froome's getting, we're talking about 20 to 30 puffs of medication in 12 hours when 8 puffs is the maximum allowed or recommended.
Yeah, I don't, you know, so you get to this. Sorry, go ahead.
So he's been tested for 10 years. So he's never had a level that's even approached the threshold for 10 years. And salbutamol is in the class of drugs that gets tested for every time.
Right.
So maybe he's tested 100 times over the course of that career, and he's never reached that level. I mean, maybe there's lab error, but you know, I think that there's something. It doesn't smell right.
Well, I think that the bigger issue here is that, you know, Chris and the team, for that matter, should have the opportunity to have due process, and that's not happening right now.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's
because I mean, right? We can sit here and we can speculate. How could you get to this level? How much did you use? Was it too much? Was it performance enhancing? Which is, you know, that's fine.
Yeah,
have those
Dylan,
conversations.
I'm here to tell you, these people listening
I
don't
know.
want to hear you or me especially talk about due process.
I get that, but what I'm trying
They
to
want
say,
to know what happened, why it happened. Is somebody the biggest cheater that ever lived? Are they going to get off or on, or what? You know, what's
right?
That's what.
But I think that conversation,
As you like to say, let me play devil's advocate. Nobody wants to hear me talk about fucking due process.
Yeah, but the issue is that if everybody involved is really interested in taking the sport forward and improving or changing the way that the sport was managed or how the athletes competed in the past, then you have to ask these types of questions. You have to look at, you know.
And that's when we're going to talk to Rafa about the roadmap.
That's right. We're going to talk to them about the roadmap. But I think, you know, as a fan, you know, I don't want to hear about this stuff until it's actually been investigated and everything. You know, Chris has had his opportunity to participate in the process and get to the end. And right or wrong, you know, we can talk about it when it's all been concluded. Because right now, it's a huge distraction. It's another black eye on the sport. And even if it turns out that he is acquitted, right, that all the damage has been done already. But I
agree.
Let's go back to my the seed that I planted regarding the Olympics. You know, when I first started cycling, it was before '96, and the national team, which is run by United States Cycling Federation under the United States Olympic Committee, which is also under the IOC, you know, that was your path to making an Olympic team, which as an American is really a huge honor. But then
if you're French, you don't care about it.
Right.
Or like Guatemalan. It's no big deal.
But I'm just saying,
Italians, who cares? I mean, come on, bro.
Okay,
going.
fair.
Sorry.
So, but the point being is that like there was a path that and a system in place, meaning the federation would focus its resources on developing young riders. There were events for riders to participate in, which would develop them as athletes, and then if they were successful, they could kind of move through the ranks, much like you did. Mm-hmm. And now that's no longer in place because professionals go to the Olympics. The international or the national cycling federations, while they still invest a great deal of their resources into the development of young athletes, it's still that development channel is still not there. But then on a broader level, look at what happened to the political climate around the IOC and the USOC or the national.
Yeah, you add stakeholders. When
Right.
the sport decided to join the Olympic movement back in 1996 was the first year. I mean, you just add more layers, more stakeholders. You add the IOC, you add the USOC, you add WADA and USADA. And I'm not trying to say that those organizations are irrelevant or shouldn't be involved in world sport.
Right.
But it just it adds more people to the table, and that confuses things. And they have interests, and they're political. And this is a lot of these things are political, and so. But that genie's out of the bottle.
Right.
And so
That's fair.
we can't go undo that.
So here's a question for you.
How long is this podcast going to go for?
I don't know. How long have we been going?
I don't know. How long have we been going? 37 minutes. Oh, yeah, we got to wrap up. Because I have a final question when we get to the end.
So
what's your question?
So my question, we won't know the answer to this, but I'd love to kind of just throw this one out there for a second. Who leaked this to the press, and what do you think the motivation was? Like,
it either came. It's only two organizations that could have leaked it, and that is WADA or the UCI, and I mean somebody with a touch point there.
Yeah. So what do you think either organization has to gain by leaking this, or why would they do it?
I don't know. I mean, by the way, too, a lot of stuff leaks, right? I mean, if you're reading about sexual harassment in the workplace, that all leaks.
Sure.
This was quoted from a source who needed to remain anonymous to protect blah blah blah. That's what they do. So that's
right.
It just seems I know your point. Your point is it seems like it happens a lot in our sport.
Right.
And I know it's frustrating. I don't know. There's something fishy about this transition from the Cookson presidency or Cookson era
regime.
to Leparchian. There's something to me. Something happened in the middle of that transition.
Yeah.
And that might just be too easy to lob up, but I don't know.
We'll find out.
Yeah, we will find out. And then so the one thing that I just want to bring this up, and we can wrap up with this, because if you're here in the United States, or even really anywhere in the world, especially U.S. or Great Britain, you know that Disney just bought Fox.
That's right.
So a blockbuster deal, tens and tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions, and I don't even know the number. I posed the question to a great friend of mine, journalist, who's pretty dialed in, like, could the combo of the two, Disney buying Fox meets this Chris Froome situation, could that be the end of Team Sky? Mm-hmm. And I expected him to say, oh, no way, come on.
Right.
That was not the response I got. The response was absolutely.
Right.
That, this is... Then you start to go to the players here. Dave Brailsford, who started the team and still runs the team, is super tight with the Sky guys and the Fox guys.
Yeah,
they're sort
Murdoch.
of homies.
Yeah.
Right? James Murdoch, his son. There's another guy who runs Sky over there. I mean, they're connected at the hip. Disney comes in. Do those guys, are they, it takes two guys to leave.
Right.
A big American corporation that, the closest thing they ever got to dope was the animated character Dopey. And so they're like, hang on a second, they're going, what can we get rid of?
Well,
and that's then look, people can. I don't have an opinion on Sky, and in fact, I do have an opinion. If I watch them, I'm like, look, they're well funded. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, they have too much money. No, whatever. Go get more money.
Yeah.
They're super professional, and I'm not trying to defend.
Wait, can I pause you for a second?
No.
What's their budget? What's
a lot?
No, what's the Sky budget?
I
like
don't know.
Ballpark, 30 million?
No, maybe more.
Okay, let's call it 40 million.
Okay, good.
$40 million is a lot of money for a team of that size to operate at the level that they do and return the number of impressions that they do. Right? Like, there's single baseball players making more than that.
I understand, but they get criticized for having $40 million a year.
Well,
but I don't.
It's absurd.
But I'm not against any of that. But
Okay.
but if that were to go away, right, the largest budget in cycling, then you start to go look. You look at yourself and like, look how stupid we are.
Well, right. Well, whoever's responsible for leaking this Chris Froome situation to the press probably just doesn't care.
Yeah. Whatever. I mean, it's not whatever, but it's that we'll never know. We'll never know.
Right.
Nobody's going to raise their hand and say, okay, I leaked it.
Well, you know.
Can I just say there's one thing that I just have to get out because it's really it bothers me. Brian Cookson in all of this is kind of the X factor, and to me, he came in with all of this. He said everything right.
Right.
He beat Pat McQuaid. He beat down the awful old Pat McQuaid and Hein Verbruggen and Armstrong regime and era. And I'm coming in. Hey, he said everything right. We're going to clean up the sport. We're going to promote women's cycling. We're going to do that. And he got smoked in the election, like 37-8 or whatever it was, because he didn't do really anything that he said he was going to do. He knew about this the whole time, keeping in mind that 2 weeks ago he gave an interview to the BBC.
Right.
Went on the record and said, Team Sky, Bradley Wiggins, Chris Froome, they should all have their reputations reinstated. If you have, and he knew all this was going to come out at some point. How in your right mind could you say you got to be an idiot to come out and say that?
There's something going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
All right. I think that wraps it up. Is there anything that we missed?
Should we leave any teasers?
Teasers for what?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Doc, thanks for joining us.
Doc Phelan.
Hey, super fun, man.
Doc he's a really fast swimmer, and so now that I just told him about that Danish study, he's going and getting 3 prescriptions for those so he can drop a second in his 100 fly tomorrow.
Absolutely.
I've been in the pool with you. You get a little competitive, so.
That's only around the company I'm keeping.
Remember that first time in Hawaii we did 6 200s and I was right on your feet and then I just destroyed you in the last 3. Do you remember that?
And then you woke up.
All right, buddy. Thanks for tuning in, and to everybody listening, thanks for tuning in. And
any questions or comments or stuff we got wrong, email us at stages@wedo.team, and we definitely want to hear from you.
Cool.